Hello and welcome to Women's Football Hub. I am your host for this episode. I am Carolyn Kent, and with me today is a former professional player who has previously coached the Brazil women's national team and the Orlando Pride. She's a technical expert for both FIFA and UEFA. She founded her own coaching business, and if that wasn't enough for you all, she is the current performance coach at the Football Association of Ireland. Welcome to Women's Football Hub, Ivi Casagrande.
Thanks, Carolyn. That was actually a very nice way to say my name. Not a lot of people got it right.
Hey, I like to think that being Scottish, I can actually technically almost kind of go with anything because obviously we have the language of Gaelic. So if I can manage that, I can usually manage most things. So thank you very much for joining us today. I'm delighted because I know how busy you are and I know how difficult it is to get any time with regards to your diary, etc. So for those people who do not know who you are, let's chat a little bit about your journey into becoming a performance coach.
I'll try to be as I have to provide a short summary because quite a lot happened in the last 10 years or so. But I'm originally from Brazil, so went and played football my entire life there with boys mostly. Played futsal for 10 years because that's pretty much what I had access to. Until I went to a trial and played for Atlético Mineiro, who was actually my dream team, which is I was a big fan of their men's team for my entire life, would go to games and stuff. So I trialed for their team. I passed, which was crazy. And I played there for about 2 years in 2005, 2007. And then from there, I kind of went with an American school to learn English because I always wanted to go out of Brazil because I knew that I couldn't do professional and studying and I didn't want to give up my study. And went to America in 2010 in Ohio. Went to a Division I school, played there 4 years. I was a pre-med back then, wanted to go to med school. And kind of after that went to a master's program as exercise physiology because I realized as an international student didn't have a lot of money to pay for my millionaire medical degree because that's what you need to do to be a medicine person in America. So so I did that. I went back to Ohio, did a master's, fell in love with exercise physiology because it was my passion of medicine with my passion for sports. And I played semi-pro there doing my master's, which was a cool experience because I got to practice, trial things that I was learning at the same time. And then that's when the career kind of started. I had a very amazing guy called Eric, who was the manager for a youth athletic training facility franchise in Michigan. Believed in me. That was my first full-time job as a director of sports performance, which was crazy because I didn't have any leadership skills or even confidence in what I was doing. But he really believed in me and he helped me kind of start from somewhere. And it was great because it forced myself to early on in my career to really lead, and whatever form that leadership was at the time, I don't know. But it helped me kind of at least shape my philosophy as a coach that I'm still shaping as I go now. But yeah, I went through different continents. I started in Brazil, went to America, and then came to England. And then with FIFA and UEFA, being very fortunate to travel the entire globe, really trying to educate, learn, collaborate with the best and the people that need the education. And then in the meantime, kind of had the dream to represent my country in the World Cup. And now with Ireland, another dream because it's a different population and amazing people. Have a lot of fun with the Irish. And that, I'm in Brighton now, very cold and rainy, but very happy here. So yeah, that's in a nutshell.
I'm glad to, and I think when you go back through your career, you've obviously done, coaching the Brazilian women's national team. You've obviously coached at the Orlando Pride. And one of the questions I obviously had for you was basically, you walked into that dressing room and, with regards to women's football in Brazil, there is one name everyone's familiar with, and that is obviously Marta. How did that feel going into that dressing room to go, all right, this is what I do now. I coach this level of player.
I had that in my mind a long time ago. Actually, when I was in Michigan, I remember this vivid memory where I was in the parking lot of my flat in Michigan. It was about -20 degrees. It was absolutely pouring rain with snow. And I was like, okay, I've been in Michigan by that time for about almost a year and a half, 2 years. And I thought to myself, I will coach Marta. Like, I want to coach Marta because I'm just very ambitious. I have a big ambition, and I just wanted to make sure I had that dream. Like, I had that dream to play for Brazil when I was a player, and I knew that that didn't work out, and I would find a way to do that in a different way. And I always tell people, this is like, it can be silly, but literally everything I've done so far, I really would think about it all the time, and I'll be obsessed with it, and I would write it down, and I would be doing everything I could to get there. And I think it's easy when you have that in your mind, but you have to action it, and you have to kind of make sure you learn from the best and do the hard work to get there. But I remember a friend of mine, Thais, who actually still works with Orlando Pride, and one of my first mentors, Ellie Mabry, who worked with the U.S. national team. She kind of, I worked with her with the U.S. youth national teams, and she's like, this job at Orlando Pride opened up, and then about 3 or 4 people at the same time said it. And I was like, oh, that's random. And I really was thinking about that the last 2 years. So yeah, it was unreal because I applied, and of course, Marta was in my mind, but I think, of course, coaching her, and for me, it was more kind of getting to the next level of my coaching career. I was working with youth, and I was loving the youth. But I just was kind of coasting a little bit, and I needed to get things going and be challenged. And I think being a full-time in a pro club environment with the biggest players in the world, I think that would kick my ass in a lot of ways to make sure I was like at the top of my game and developing myself. So of course, at first I was like, yeah, this is the dream. But at the same time, I was very level-headed that it was just a player like anybody else. I needed to be professional. And but yeah, as soon as I walked in Orlando, and I had all my U-Haul with my dog, and like moving from Michigan, all my stuff to Orlando, I walked in, and I had Alex Morgan, Selena Rue, and Marta all in the same room, and we talk about imposter syndrome. It took me a while. I think the first season with them, I, of course, like at first you kind of go, whoa, what am I doing here? Like, am I even good for this job? But then it got to a point that something clicked, and then I started seeing them as just humans, and then my confidence increased, and I was like thriving for the first time as a coach. I was, really being able to be creative and stuff like that. So yeah, so I think it was definitely a dream come true. It allowed me to develop as a professional very quickly. And of course, it was one of the hardest parts of my career because after that first year, I almost quit because there's a lot of lack of confidence and thinking that I was just not enough. But yeah, I tried to sleep on it. I asked the director to sleep on it, and that was the best decision I've ever done because it allowed me to have one more season with them after that.
And certainly your career's gone from strength to strength since that point. So I think taking that time to make that decision was probably a great thing. So let's talk about when you go into a team then, right? We talk about kind of creating that sort of kind of positive, high performance culture. Let's just chat about that. When you go into work with a team, what are some of the things that you look to say, do you know what, I need to bring this in? What would be some of your go-tos?
It's evolving as I go, because the more you go through different environments, the more you kind of tend to take your bias away. I think when I first started, I wanted to bring all the stuff that helped me to be successful in the less environments, and I realized that that was a very tricky thing to do, because you're in different environments, and because I'm in such a variety of cultures, like with all my different consulting projects, it really allows me to take a step back and say, okay, I do have those biases coming in as a coach, where there's things that I love doing it and that worked in the last club, but it might not work in this environment because it's a completely different set of individuals, as a different ecosystem. So I started to be a little bit more patient and kind of step back and just almost feel like a detective, just kind of go with a lens and from an outside standpoint, zoom out and just learn about players, learn about the ecosystem. That means that as a coach, which is very hard as a coach to do, and it's very hard to find coaches that do this, is to actually listen more than to actually tell people what to do, especially in the science business and the scientific business. A lot of the times we tend to think that we have the answers, but we barely have the answers. And I think having the humility to kind of understand that, yes, science is important. You need to have evidence-based approach, research-based and stuff like that. But at the end of the day, what works with one player works with one staff member. It might not work with the others. So I just started to really listen more, and identify things. And I've become quite good at being very, have a big intuition for the room, like read the room, read the people, read the ones that are most comfortable to speak out, know the ones that might have a lot to give but might not have the confidence to speak out. How do we get the most out of them? And then I realized, whoa, that I barely have answers here. But I think by listening, I'm able to get a little bit of my experience with my knowledge to actually shape that with that specific person, that specific team. So yeah, I think now, at the moment, I'm way more leaning into that intuition, leaning into that, okay, this might work with you, but might not work with this other player. So allow players to just, learn how to try things out. And I think that a lot of times we as coaches fail to do that because we're just telling them what to do. And then you have players that don't know how to make decisions for themselves. They are just asking people to tell them what to do, but then they cannot look within, they cannot reflect, they cannot see, what am I needing at the moment?
Yeah, and I think that comes down to performance when you think about it. They're effectively trying to solve problems on the field, and if they're always needing to be told what to do, if the game shifts or it changes, they're going to struggle to do that. So I suppose it's about exposing them to situations in training and allowing them also to make their own decisions and see what works for them. Because just because you play centre midfield doesn't mean you're going to play the same way as other centre midfielders. And I think it's important to recognise that player individuality, isn't it? Let's talk about cooking a coach's role. You said try and get them to listen a little bit more. Have you always, obviously want to make sure that we don't say something that's going to upset anyone, but have you always kind of worked with coaches that have been, proper bought in? Because I mean, certainly from my perspective, I have worked with coaches who perhaps aren't as bought into some of the sports science stuff and certainly some of the rehabilitation stuff. So have you had that sort of experience, and what would you say is important with regards to the coach helping with setting the tone?
Yeah, I think every single coach that I've worked with challenged me in a different way, and I think with regards to that, as a practitioner, I think we need to crave for that instead of just trying to find a coach that will agree with you all the time. And I think all the coaches that I've had, literally, I've learned so much from them. And they've been, some of them have been one of the challenging relationships that I've had, in terms of, not that I struggle and putting a point across, but sitting in meeting rooms until 10:30 p.m. every day, trying to prove a point, or trying to challenge and trying to learn from each other, because the coaches that don't ask questions, they're not, probably might not be interested. So I think that you have to be able to find a middle ground with coaches, where you need to be able to step in their shoes. And I think sometimes it takes a lot of time and effort to do that. And a lot of coaches are not, think they don't have the time to do it. But I think it's such a useful thing and such a valuable thing, because once you know their kind of world, you know what they are wanting to get out of the team, and then you can kind of come and be part of that.
Yeah.
And I think you also have to understand that you're never going to win all the discussion points ever, right? And I think it's about putting a seed into their brains, that to a point that if something happens along the future, they will go, oh wait, I remember having that discussion. Maybe I can try something out. So that's why I think you need to know, get out of, if you're a coach, you need to get out of if you're a technical coach, you need to get out of that world a little bit. If you're a sports scientist, a strength conditioning coach, you need to get out of your bubble a little bit. As soon as I started working with people and asking people in the business world, people that, marketing, that use negotiation, that use human behavior, which is a huge thing for me, to actually, that started really guiding me on that journey, because you have to be able to know how to negotiate. You need to be able to deal with people. You need to be able to see the other human in front of you and say, okay, what are their decisions being originated from? And you have to be like in constant kind of detective mode all the time. And that's why I created a lot of times within my Excel sheets and within my SNC reflection tabs, where I'm constantly looking around and say, okay, I need to put this here, to force myself to reflect. And then not only to do that, what is my action point from that? Because it's one thing you reflect and see something. The other thing is just that sits in there and you don't do anything with it. So if you develop something that is within your Excel sheets or whatever you use in your coaching plan, journal log, whatever, that you can kind of link to, okay, this is a reflection point. This is what I've listened players talking about, coach talking about. I need to be able to do this or connect with this person to make this happen. And then outcome.
But I think that's it. And I think, when you're talking and you're dealing with players, if you notice something about a player that something works for them, and then recognizing that actually that doesn't work for the other three players that they're working with, but it brings you back to that intuitiveness that you were talking about. If I'm intuitively knowing that certain things work for this player, I can use that more with that player. I think one of the things I noted with regards to working with coaches, once I recognized myself that, listen, these people are under a lot of stress, and especially if it's a head coach, they lose their job if things don't go well. It's not me as a physiotherapist usually that loses their job, it's the head coach. And I think once I recognized that pressure, that helped me a lot with understanding where they might have been coming from. So let's talk about kind of the actual kind of team and kind of working with them. What specific strategies or routines do you tend to implement with regards to training when you're talking about kind of building that sort of strong team culture?
Well, that's it's a hard question, because there's a lot of different ways we can go about it. But I think, like I said, I think the past few years, I've started to understand this team more of like an ecosystem. And I think Kelly Lindsay, when I worked with her at Lewis, and I was coming as a lead sports scientist consultant, which was amazing, because I was on the outside world looking in within, which allowed me to kind of see things from a different perspective. And we sit down and we kind of go, okay, this is the ecosystem. What are the moving parts that actually interconnect and actually make the job on the pitch happen? And then working with Eileen Gleeson with national team, one of the best leaders I've worked with, and understand this whole idea of ecosystem in terms of understanding what needs to be part of our strategy, and all departments need to come together to actually make sure things work. And again, it has to be a process of debrief every single camp, every single competition, every single, you can, if you're in a club, you have to be able to go, okay, in every 2 months we're going to do a debrief system where we go ask players how the ecosystem is going, ask the staff, because I see a lot of things, we revolve things around players, but also I don't see a lot of things revolving around the staff in terms of how can I get the best out of my staff? How can I make sure they're actually in a good place to do their jobs and they have the mental space to do it? And I think that culture in football is still very, very toxic in terms of we drive ourselves to the ground. And at the end of the day, if we do that, we're actually doing a disservice to our athletes. So, and I think it's all about helping create better leaders that are the CEOs, the next CEOs, the next technical directors that actually understand that part. Because when you're a S&C, when you're a physio, when you're even a head coach, you don't have control of things or what's going to happen to you if results don't go well. I think it's a hard thing to do in sports. I think it's where that's where my energy is in terms of my own business kind of strategy, is to create leaders that understand the ecosystem in all different parts of the ecosystem, because they're the ones that are making the decisions. So I'm going to a very zoom out perspective. I know you asked a little bit, but I think that is quite a big part of the puzzle. Because you wouldn't even understand how much, like, as a coach, it took me a while to understand that having a great relationship with our team admin, or the people, even like the masseurs, like every single part of the puzzle needs to be first having clarity of roles. They need to be on the same page. So how do you create a system where that information is well established towards everyone? Because that will dictate what I do with my players. So I remember in camps and even in different associations or different clubs where I go, I want to do this as a recovery protocol. I want to do this. And then at the end of the day, I didn't have the buy-in from players because my thing was conflicting with another thing that was in the schedule that was probably more important for them, which is having time, mental space in a camp or in a day to day. So as soon as we kind of remove the competing kind of things that would make the behavior, we started thinking, okay, what is the priority here? What do we need to prioritize in this camp or in this week? Because every week is a different opponent, a different pressure. So we have to be carefully getting the schedule right, because if you overload them with meetings, that's a cognitive overload. People take for granted mental fatigue. And Sarah Murray, who's a psychologist friend of mine who worked with me in 3 different organizations, and we work together quite well, but the mental fatigue and the physical fatigue have to be carefully done. So when we're adding something in, we always have to ask ourselves, is this going to provide players room to thrive? And if that doesn't, we remove it. A session in the gym in a 10-day camp is not going to make any difference, or a session in the gym in this 7-day period is not going to make any difference if they're not right here. And maybe it will for a player, but that's why we provide the environment and say, okay, you have this, but it's optional. So you can go to this, you can go to that, and give the players the ability to go, what do I need right now? Do I need a mental recovery? Do I need a physical recovery? And that's where I think we need to be very creative in what we do.
Yeah. And I think that comes back to the fact of the athlete knowing themselves. You're almost teaching them to know themselves and what works for them rather than science telling them this is what you need to do. Even though the evidence might say, let's do X for this player, but at that time, in that mind space, that might not be right for that player. And one of the things I've always thought about, this will be interested on your take on it, because obviously you're working with this level of player, but it must be strange for a player who goes to the job, which is football, and then when they go home, they've still got constant football because their social media, all the sponsorship, everything is tied towards that. And I've certainly more on the male side with when I was working, had footballers who've come into physio sessions and gone, I don't want to talk about football. Like, and I've always taken that as almost a little mental health sort of, okay, let's make sure we've got a bit more balance here. Do you kind of agree with that? Is there mental health strategies that you maybe use with some players, or is that kind of something you would give to other people in the team?
Absolutely. I think that actually, if I'm honest with you, I think that's probably the most challenging aspects in my job at the moment. I think it's you have players that, because of the system, because of, that's why I think have such a big responsibility as coaches, because we can actually make players obsess with the grind, because we obsess with grind. So I think you have to be almost like a role model for players to know how to, recharge and know how to actually, I know that you might think that you need to be doing stuff right now, but why don't you try to, instead of doing this, go barefoot and pretty much like walk in a forest? Very, very woo-woo, but I think people need to start looking at ways to disconnect. And I think as a coach, I think everything I've done so far as a coach, I've tried on me first. That's why I think it's such an important thing to be able to keep myself in check. So all the workouts that I do with the players, I do it myself first, because I want to feel it out. I want to know what actually does to my system. And I started to trial different things. So like runs where they would just do nose breathing, and that will take the intensity out of it and find a way, it's a way to link that to performance, to the player for buy-in, instead of going, I want to do a breathing protocol, I want you to meditate. Players will not get there. Like, you have to be able to be very creative. So doing those and telling them, which I tried for a year, doing workouts that were not intense in times of going above 90% of my intensity, max heart rate, whatever, but they were, nose breathing or controlling my breath or being able to go through gears from mouth to like nose. And I was probably the fittest I've been, because it actually physiologically works, but also links in very well within yourself. So I would tell them, instead of going for distance, for time, I would say the intensity that you go is based on how much you can handle this nasal breathing or nasal in, mouth out for this specific time. And then players started to like, oh, okay, now I'm feeling way more like mentally strong doing those things, because I'm in control of my breath, which I started doing that when I had a panic attack, and it allowed me to give my players different tools. So yeah, I think definitely this is the number one challenge, is how to get players to first slow down. It's okay to not be doing stuff for football. One of the best players out there, they are the ones that probably struggle the most to do that, because their entire life have been football. But you actually, if you teach them, if you know how to kind of guide them and facilitate that process, and their personal side increases, like their life outside of football is better. Life in football is way better. So I think it's kind of it happened to me when I were able to kind of separate things. My professional career just skyrocketed in terms of I was able to be creative. I was able to be confident, saying yes to some things, saying no to some things. So I think that's definitely nowadays, and again, stakeholders, decision makers need to be able to do that, to like allow players, like an example, a huge example here is international players that play for their countries. They are playing the top teams in the world, which have very big schedules. When they are international break, the players that are not in international break, they normally get 3-4 days off. But the players that are international break, they never get days off. So how do you manage that as a not a coach? Because a lot of the times the decision makers are above the head coach, to allow players to find windows where they can recharge from all this stress and mental stress around. And if it's not somebody from above there making those decisions, players are not going to want to make those decisions because they're afraid if they make those decisions, they're out of the squad. They're, you know, I take some time to rest, I'm out of the squad. So I think that's where in the next few years, when women's football is growing and growing and growing and getting more attention, we need to be careful with that, and we need to educate those stakeholders and decision makers to be able to do that.
Yeah, and I think if you just take that back to the normal person, it comes down to a work-life balance. And the question is, are we getting that right for players? I think that's probably, especially professional players, because they don't get that switch off just because of the way the culture is with around football. Now, I could talk to you all day, but I know you're a very busy woman and we don't have much time left. So I couldn't possibly have you on this podcast without asking you about the World Cup that is coming to Brazil, which, by the way, I've already decided I am going. So I'm going to start learning Portuguese at some point so that I can at least converse and eat while I'm over there. Exactly.
Yeah.
So how is it going to change Brazil, do you think? Because Brazil, obviously history-wise, has its, issues with regards to women's football and how it wasn't really supported. So is it going to have the long reach change, do you think?
I mean, that's what we hope for. I think if it happened the same thing that happened in Australia, I think if our country does a good job in terms of visibility, I think that will change a lot, because that will get players to watch young players or young females that are just want to use sport as a platform, not even to compete, but to use the sport to change their life. I think that's the most important part. But I think the challenges will be after that, provide the places and facilitate that to those young girls. Like, okay, I now have this passion. I saw the players and then I'm completely changed and moved by it. I want to get out there and do it. But then if they don't provide teams or provide environment for them to be able to do that, then it's just a one-off event that happened. So I remember like living here in Brighton. I remember walking in, something simple, right? They put this park, like a BMX park. They built this random, and I was there for the first time. They opened the doors. Actually, I don't think they even opened officially. People got in, and you see so many kids and families kind of going there and spend the entire day there. And instead of being on their phones, they are actually doing, and this is how you change the environment and change the behavior. It's actually, and I think in Brazil, if they are able to create that into facilitation of the environment for young girls to actually have a way to get there, I think that's the key. But I'm 100% sure that the environment is going to be amazing for the World Cup, because our country is is very warm in terms of people are very warm, and they're going to make sure everybody that's there have the best time. But again, we have to be able to action from that. And I think the big stakeholders, the federation, they have to just do something about it, not just use it as a check mark, which is the most challenging part. But I know that there's a lot of amazing people in the country trying to do the right things, and I hope that they're able to voice it and make things happen.
Yeah, I think, and it's about leaving the legacy, but also investing in the legacy. So you are obviously part of that legacy, Evie. If anybody is looking to get in touch with you, because you now do, of course, have your new coaching business, how would they do that?
Yeah, so I just released my website, casagrandecoaching.org, which is exciting because it tells a little bit about, why I do what I do. And yeah, on Instagram, I post most of my stuff there. And yeah, I'm opening up new mentorships for next year, which is exciting. So late Jan, I'll be having group mentorships and getting back to that because I've done that in the past and it was a quite busy year. Last year I couldn't do that, but yeah, quite excited to continue to learn and be in this space.
And there you have it. If you want to work with Evie, you absolutely can by reaching out to her. If you are currently working with players, please remember that they are people first. Please remember to follow the evidence, and we will see you soon.
Thank you for listening to Women's Football Hub. The information within this podcast is for informational purposes only. No material on this podcast is intended to be a substitute for medical advice, diagnosis, or treatment. Please contact your doctor or another healthcare professional if you have any questions about anything raised in this podcast.